So this is called a support vector classifier. And the only difference between your max margin classifier and support vector classifier is in max margin, you don't have that error. None of the samples can cross the support vectors. None of the samples can cross the decision boundary. In support vector classifier, you might have some samples which are crossing your decision boundary or your support vectors. Okay, so that's the only difference. So this, that you first try to maximize this margin. And these are the parameters, like the parameters of your equation or your plane, depending upon what kind of dimensionality you have in your data. And then you have additional terms, like these are error terms. So for each sample, you will compute this error. And for most of the samples, the error will be 0 because they will be like in the right side of the plane, right? But these will come into account when some of the samples are actually trying to cross the boundary. So you will have, again, this is the same condition. You are trying to minimize like the parameters of that equation. So don't worry about this. All this is your max margin classifier. And again, this is also coming from your max margin classifier, because what it's trying to do is, so this is your learned equation. Okay, so your beta 0, beta 1, all these are your parameters. P will depend on like what's the dimensionality of your space. And yi is just a sample. Like, so for each sample, you will, yi is actually your class label. So it will be either +1 or -1, depending upon which class you have. So each sample you will put in this equation, and then it will give you like some kind of sign. Either it's positive or negative, depending upon which side of the decision boundary that point lies. And then you will try to maximize this margin, right? So instead of just sign, you look at this value, like how far that point should be from the decision boundary. So that's the margin M. And this is the additional term, the error. So for each sample, you will have this kind of error. So this is the additional term you will have in support vector classifier. And later you will see that you have a lot of hyperparameters when you try to train your support vector machine or support vector classifier. And one of the important parameter, if you have trained like these models before without understanding what it is, so you might have seen like this parameter, hyperparameter C. Okay, so that C actually means this allowable error you can have in your training samples. Okay, and again, this is a hyperparameter you will set when you're training your classifier. And again, as you change your budget for this value of C, your decision boundary will change and your support vectors will change. Okay, so this is like a non-negative tuning parameter. Of course, non-negative because you want like some allowable positive error, right? If it's negative, then it's same as your maximum margin classifier, because you're not allowing any error. All right, so that's the difference between maximum margin classifier and support vector classifier.